Okay, kindly tell me your name, please.
Reed Brody with the International Commission of Jurists.
What do you make of the government's white paper, which recommended for Jammeh's prosecution, Jammeh and his accomplices?
Well, I think it's very important recognition by the government that justice needs to take place. We heard the Minister of Justice say quite clearly that Yahya Jammeh would face justice, that the modalities had to be worked out. And I think that after the very powerful testimonies at the TRRC, the Truth Commission, that linked Yahya Jammeh directly to murder, to torture, to rape. There's an expectation, both in Gambia and internationally, that Yahya Jammeh and his accomplices will be brought to justice sooner rather than later.
It took you several years before you could bring former Chadian dictator Hissan Habre and the former Chilean president Augusto Pinochet to justice. How long do you think it will take you to bring Jammeh to justice?
Well, how long it takes really depends on the political will of, in particular, of the Gambian government. I believe that there's a desire within the region. Let's not forget that the worst massacre of the Yahya Jammeh period was the killing of approximately 59 West African migrants, including 44 from Ghana, 9 from Nigeria, several from Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, etc. And I think that if Gambia takes the initiative and reaches out to those countries, that there'd be an appetite within the region for a regional tribunal, a hybrid tribunal between Gambia, say, and ECOWAS, which would not only be an important justice mechanism, but it would make it very difficult for Equatorial Guinea, say, not to hand over Yahya Jammeh to an African justice system, an African court.
You spoke about the political will, but it seems like most of the victims are not optimistic. They think there is no political will because Jammeh was in Equatorial Guinea and Jammeh's issue was not raised by President Barrow.
Well, I think it is strange that 1 week after the Minister of Justice stated flatly that the former president would be brought to justice, that the president conducted a state visit to Equatorial Guinea and, according to his spokesman, did not raise the issue. But I believe that there's such a strong appetite and such strong evidence, frankly, that the government will hopefully move forward, take concrete actions, set up a tribunal. There's still a lot of work to be done. A court has to be set up, evidence has to be collected, charges have to be laid, and of course Yahya Jammeh has to be brought into custody. So it's going to take a little while for this to happen.
Where do you want Jammeh to face prosecution?
Before a fair court, wherever that is. Obviously, the strong hope is that it will be a regional African court. I think most people agree that it might not be wise to have Yahya Jammeh held in detention and put on trial here in the Gambia, but that somewhere else in the sub-region where a hybrid internationalized court could provide a fair trial for Yahya Jammeh, where his victims could participate in the trial, and where international law could be applied, I think that would be the best solution.
So in the event that Jammeh is found guilty, where do you want him to serve the prison time? Because there's a concern that he's a Marmite figure, he's popular in the Gambia. And as you know, Charles Taylor is in Belmarsh prison, the former LRA commander Jibril Masako is in Finland. Where do you want Jammeh to serve his prison time?
I think we're getting ahead of ourselves here. I think the most important thing now is that an investigation be conducted, that charges be laid, and that he be brought before a court and given a fair trial.
Why his son Habre, Augusto Pinochet, Baby Dog, and Yahya Jammeh are not Mengistu Haile Mariam or Blaise Compaoré?
Well, I was very happy to see the verdict in the Blaise Compaoré in the Thomas Sankara trial. I felt like I was there. It was very important. I think there are many people who should face justice. I did try, together with South African colleagues, when Mengistu visited South Africa many years ago, to have charges laid against Mengistu, but the government of South Africa permitted him to go back to Zimbabwe. I also believe that charges should be brought against former U.S. President George Bush for alleged torture and disappearances. There are many people, not just Africans, who should be facing justice today.
So you're an American. You said former U.S. president. Why didn't you start with George Bush, Tony Blair, and John Howard?
Well, I actually wrote a book. I wrote a report for Human Rights Watch called Getting Away with Torture, which laid out the case against former President Bush. I wrote a book in French, Faut-il juger George Bush? And I participated in attempts using the same instruments of international justice to file cases against George Bush in France and Germany and Spain. Unfortunately, we see that there are double standards in international justice. Unfortunately, it's much easier for victims to get justice against an African dictator than it is for victims to get justice against a Western president. And that's something that we have to fight against.
Are you bothered about criticism that you only go after African leaders and not the powerful ones in the West and other parts of the world, but you go only after African leaders?
Well, of course, in my case, it's not true. I have worked on the case of George Bush, Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, and others. But it's a fair criticism of the international system that makes it possible, still very difficult, for the victims of Augusto Pinochet or Hissène Habré to get justice, but makes it much, much more difficult for the Muslim victims from Guantanamo, from Abu Ghraib, from the secret prisons to get justice. I think we're in a very interesting international moment, though. We're in a kind of a Ukraine moment in international justice, where there's never been such an international mobilization of international justice, of the International Criminal Court, of other institutions in the face of what is going on in the Ukraine. The hope, though, and what we have to fight for, is to make that the rule and rather than the exception, that kind of response should happen whether the crimes are being committed in Ukraine or in Yemen or in Israel-Palestine or in Ethiopia.
Why do you put so much effort on African leaders, not other like rebel leaders and warlords like Dominic Ongwen, Joseph Kony, and others?
Well, you know, the ICC takes care of the rebel leaders. Let's remember that the only people who've been convicted to a final sentence at the International Criminal Court are rebel leaders. It's much, much harder to work with victims to go after state officials. And that's where I've put my emphasis in the Hissène Habré case, in the George Bush case, in the Augusto Pinochet case, in the Yahya Jammeh case.
Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak said if he were a Palestinian, he will probably join one of the rebel groups or terrorist organizations to fight Israel to gain his freedom. Why are you pursuing similar thing? Because Israel also is clamping down on the rights of Palestinians.
Yes, I strongly believe that what is going on in the occupied Palestinian territories can be categorized as apartheid, as more and more people are recognizing. And the International Criminal Court has jurisdiction over Israel Palestine, and you know, it would be great now that the International Criminal Court is sending 42 investigators to the Ukraine to investigate war crimes, that it use the same energy and the same speed to work on alleged crimes in the occupied Palestinian territories.
So will you also put your energy to help the ICC bring either the former prime ministers of Israel and the current one to justice?
I mean, I'm working on the cases I'm working on. Obviously, I believe that the ICC, and I've spoken out very strongly. In first, it took over 10 years for the ICC to decide that it had jurisdiction, and the speed with which the ICC is working in Ukraine is admirable. I mean, this is what we've always been hoping the ICC would do. But it needs to use that same intensity and that same speed, even when it's looking at powerful countries and the allies of powerful countries.
Finally, what message do you have for the leadership of this country when it comes to political will?
Well, I think there's strong support here in the Gambia. One thing I have seen throughout my time working here is how much support there is for victims. Even this week, traveling around with Martin Chetty, the Ghanaian survivor, everywhere we go, people say, "Oh my God, I know who you are," and they say how sorry they are for what happened to him. And I think there's a desire for justice. There's a desire to see that the victim's quest is upheld here, and I think the government's going to have to listen to that.